These lectures will give you an opportunity to become familiar with works of scholars from around the world who have worked extensively on different aspects of Mahatma Gandhi's life and its impact on the generations that followed. Today, we have with us Professor Priyanka Upadhyay, who is going to talk about Gandhi in contemporary peace continuum. But before we move ahead, I would like to invite our principal ma'am, Professor Vibha Singh Chauhan, to say a few words. Ma'am.
Thank you, Kajal. I first extend a very, very warm and hearty welcome to Professor Priyanka Upadhyay, who I know is extremely busy. In fact, I know that he was speaking at in a webinar at Gujarat University, probably Ahmedabad, and also we have organized this program, the history department, especially Dr. Amit Suman, in a very, very short time. And the fact that Professor Upadhyay agreed to use up his Sunday afternoon for us, it just shows that it is evidence enough for us to extend very special thanks to you, sir. Many, many thanks for agreeing to talk to our students and our teachers. The webinar is a 5-day webinar. The 4 days, of course, we have scholars talking on Gandhi, and the 5th day is an open house discussion among the students, because we thought that would be a good idea to give space to our students to express their opinion. The students of the history department have been extremely busy and extremely efficient in putting this together. My thanks to them, the whole staff of Department of History, Dr. Amit Suman, the coordinator, teacher in charge of History Department, Dr. Ajit, and all other teachers. Thank you very much for organizing this very, very timely webinar. Members of IQAC, convener Dr. Anshu, and all other members of IQAC, thank you for collaborating with the History Department and putting this together. Our first talk actually dealt with ways of reading Gandhi and the gray areas which could be identified while reading Gandhi. Our talk today from the topic, as well as what we know about our honorable speaker, will be focused on the peace process, from what I can understand. Professor Upadhyay has worked extensively in the area of peace studies and conflict resolution. And his last book, Long Walk of Peace Towards a Culture of Prevention, is a book which, when I read the title, then I went to the web. I haven't read the book, but I read about the book, because in my mind, it rang a bell of Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. The book, of course, I think is very different. It probably deals with international relations, diplomacy, and how to prevent violence. Gandhi is well known for saying, an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. Violence cannot break the chain of violence. And even in South Africa, after the apartheid regime ended, actually Mandela had set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to break the chain of violence, so that violence does not get perpetuated through vengeance and through attributing violation of human rights to individuals. So rather than going to past actions, while this commission did record all the violence and violations against human rights, it was very consciously, did not aim at individual perpetuators. So peace definitely is a dynamic process. Gandhi's thought was dynamic, and we understood from our previous lecture how it has evolved. Many people see the contradictions in Gandhi as evolution, and peace is also one of those discourses actually that keep getting evolved. So it is an extremely relevant, important, pertinent area, and I am very, very happy. It gives me great pleasure, Professor Upadhyay, to welcome you amidst us. Very, very warm welcome, and thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Should I speak or there is a formality? Yes.
Sir, there is someone with us. We have Dr. Pushpendra Kumar from Internal Quality Assurance. He would like to say two words, then we will proceed with the
No
lecture,
problems.
if it's fine.
Yeah.
Pushpendra, sir, are you here?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, guest speaker today. Principal Madam Dr. Vibha Singh Chauhan, convener IQAC Dr. Anshu, coordinator of this program Amit Kumar Suman. And today, as we have, you have mentioned already that we have been talking about for last couple of days relevance of Mahatma Gandhi in the 21st century. I would like to argue that yes, Gandhiji, when we think of Gandhiji, when you try to explore more, you will see another dimension of Mahatma Gandhiji. And today, even today, Gandhi matters. And that may be because of his legacy of non-violence, maybe because of religious philosophy he has given, and his concern towards environment. He talk about sustainability, recycle, because I belong to a stream which is commerce and management. So I thought that that is also important, that we need to put some light on environment. He talk about sustainability, recycle, and all those things. And the most important thing, the another dimension he has discussed, that is the openness. Anyone can come to him, anyone can talk to him. So that was a kind of openness towards life, and that is reflecting on transparency. And I'm not sure about one thing. Maybe a Professor Priyankar would like to talk about that sense of humor the Mahatma Gandhi has given. And beside this all, I would like to argue that Mahatma Gandhi ji was the most influential and important political leader and thinker of the 20th century, whose legacy is still relevant to all times. And what is it that makes Mahatma Gandhi travel across countries? What is it that makes him a universal figure? What makes him a Gandhi such an exceptional figure? What is it that makes a man from one country 156 years ago still spoken of with interest and appreciation and curiosity? And so many part of the different countries in the world. So I will request Professor that Sir will put more light. And I know Mahatma Gandhi as a freedom fighter. We can remember him. We can recall as a freedom fighter, religious thinker, social reformers, and for me, like a teacher, a writer. So thank you very much, all, for giving me this opportunity, Principal Madam, guest speaker, IQAC convener, and the coordinator of this program, and special thanks to students for joining us today. Now I request our guest speaker to put more light.
Thank you, sir. Before we move ahead, I would like Damayanti to introduce us all with today's speaker. Damayanti, over to you.
Thank you, Kajal. Widely regarded as the pioneer of peace studies in India, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay holds the UNESCO Chair for Peace and Intercultural Understanding at Banaras Hindu University. He also heads the Malviya Center for Peace Research, situated in BHU. He was selected for the Guest Scholar Award of the Woodrow Wilson Center at International Scholars at Washington, D.C. 1992, Faculty Research Award, Canadian Government 1999, and Senior Fulbright Award in 2004. Now I would request Priyankar Upadhyay sir to begin with his lecture, and all can either drop your names in the chat box for questions or questions itself. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, all of you. Dr. Chauhan, Principal of Kirori College, and Dr. Suman, who was instrumental in bringing me here. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to think about Gandhi, to learn more about him, and share your own visions about Mahatma. But then the context today is also, while waiting for this whole program to start, in my memory lane, I went to Kirori College when our student days, mid-70s. We would often go to Kirori College at times to attend the lectures of some of the iconic professors. If I remember correctly, Frank Thakur Das was one such name. So many people. So Kirori College stands for that quality, and I'm very happy to see that the tradition has been kept on, and the KM College is continuing with the tradition with the help of wonderful young students, the colleagues like all of you here, and not to miss our very illustrious, very creative principal, Dr. Chauhan. I have, in the past, I have seen some of her writings, and in fact, we were part of a process through which her book was inaugurated at Banaras Hindu University. So it's a nostalgic moment in so many ways. Now, Dr. Chauhan was right that past few days, many of us, and I think it doesn't require a celebrity status at all to be invited, but there were hordes of workshops and seminars, and one kept on escaping from one to another. Yesterday was Mizoram, the day before was Gujarat, even earlier to that there was a university in San Diego. And if one really takes a data account, I think thousands of lectures and seminars have been organized, and many of them we would not know because at every nook and corner. So Gandhi lives with us. I think that is a truism. There is no doubt about it. But then this kind of also raises a question that what kind of Gandhi lives in us? Because if we be honest enough, especially from the point of view of humanity, one could really sort of easily be a little critical and say that there is definitely a collective failure to translate Gandhian ideas, Gandhian wisdom, Gandhian worldview, Wantanshun, whatever you call it, since very beginning of his departure. I mean, we have failed him in so many ways. I mean, the world today, and as my theme, specifically theme, which was given to me by Dr. Suman, which we negotiated, is on peace. So whether you take peace or take so many other areas, we see that there is not much to celebrate in terms of honoring and practicing what Mahatma Gandhi preached. But he is still not stale. He survives. He survives in different degrees in our consciousness, in our everyday life, everyday conversation. Sometimes without reading Gandhi, we may chide him, we may criticize him, and there are funny opinions about Gandhi. But then he lives with us. Gandhi never gets stale. The other thing that really bothers me is that I remember, like I have put in almost more than over 4 decades teaching, that right since our student days to mid-70s onwards, 40 years, 30 years back, even 4 decades ago, there will be seminars entitled Relevance of Gandhi. I mean, the theme is undying. Why really question yourself? Why interrogate yourself about the relevance of Gandhi? I think it's a kind of, I'm sorry to say this maybe applies just to me, not to anybody. This is a kind of guilty conscience. There is a sense that, well, we had Gandhi, we elevated Gandhi to a superhuman stature, we put him on the wall, we called him Rashtrapita, but in real life situations, we are not able to follow him. And the way only we can do is to often remind ourselves that Gandhi is still alive. But be that what it is, the fact is that these are the occasions which transform us. I mean, at my stage, you can say, my age, you can say, people get cynical, but the young minds, they still are open minds, where they have to keep the seeds alive. And in Gandhi, you have one person who very clearly tells us that there is hope. The situation, whether it is the COVID pandemic, whether it is the hugely overarmed world today with over 20,000 nukes. Only this morning I read the front page coverage of Secretary General's, United Nations Secretary General's lamentation that we are very dangerously poised towards a total annihilation. We are bothered about pandemic, but we are not as much bothered about the 20,000 nuclear multiple entry vehicles, etc., which are in readiness. And the situation of the global reality, the unpeacefulness, if I can say, is constantly on the increase. As we know that when the United Nations was created, 45, even before that, if you are historians, a lot of you guys are from history. Even in League of Nations came, Woodrow Wilson declared his 14 points, League of Nations was created. Similarly, Euphoria was there. When United Nations came into existence, the hope, the optimism was that there wouldn't be any wars any after. Now that United Nations, like I remember, I don't know why I'm being a little emotional, but as young people, we used to hear, Watan Azad hai, ab koi gulshan na ho jaye. So like now the United Nations is there, so there won't be any war. And even if there is a war, there will be all for one, one for all. All the nations will get together and they will sort of quell the anger, the disaffection, the conflict, violence. It didn't happen. And United Nations was always a great idea, and I will come to that because that's an important plank of my conversation with you on peace and peacefulness. But we failed United Nations also. Soon after it was created, there was this power politics, and it's still on. But today, and that's where I will go into more specifically into the peace discourse and where Gandhi stands today. If you see, and this is especially for the young minds, and everybody, all of us are young minds actually, that we should learn, that we should consider that the international politics is never so alarmingly uncertain, anxietyful, and prone to any kind of accident as it was perhaps nowhere in the past. After the United Nations came, Cold War. Past Cold War, once again, we got, we heaved a sigh of relief, saying that, well, now the peace epidemic has come and there will be no wars after the end. Cold War came to an end. 20 years hence, we realized that over 115 million people lost their lives in civilian warfare. So the spree goes on, but nothing was as compared to what is today. If you look at the relationship between the two superpowers, if you look at the conflicting patterns in Indian subcontinent, if you look at what is happening in Middle East, notwithstanding a couple of Abraham Agreement and all, the situation is very dismal. We are living under the shadow of a total annihilation. Even if pandemic doesn't destroy us completely, I think this is an aspect that we need to really worry about. And then it comes to me that I think it needs a lot of getting together of our soul, our mind, the different ways we perceive Mahatma Gandhi, the different way we perceive peace to find a solution. And for one simple reason, and this reason was very succinctly articulated 12 years after our independence, in 1959, when perhaps one of the iconic disciple of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., visited India. He was so emotional about it. One has to read his memoirs. I almost spent over a month in India. And Junior Gandhi, as we used to call him, and Gandhi had gone, of course, as we know, he was assassinated. While leaving, people asked him about his experiences, and he was full of Gandhi and full of his wisdom and how his wisdom can. And then one cynical journalist asked him a question, very cynically. He said, "Where is Gandhi today? Do we see him anywhere?" That was just 10 years after independence. So, and Martin Luther King Jr. Became a little nonplussed. But then he said something which is so instructive. He said, look, Gandhi is inevitable. Gandhi is inescapable. And if humanity is to survive, we will have to eventually follow what Gandhi had prescribed. It's up to you, choice is ours. And now we see that this very humanity, whether it is armament, which is, or the rising scale of structural violence, and I'll talk a little bit about it, a worsening ecological crisis about which I think Dr. Pushpendra Bench was feeling a little bit about, focused on that, whether it is environment, climate change, whether it's terrorism, or the inequitable dimensions of globalization, which has led to what we call it the globalization of misery. So we find that somewhere Gandhi is everywhere, in thought, on roads. I mean, it's many of us now, in pre-pandemic days, we used to trot globe, teachers, academics, students, businessmen. And wherever you go in the world, you will find a road named after him. Wherever you go, you will find a bust of Gandhi, whether it is United Nations. And as you know that I work with UNESCO past 12 years, and one of the most upfront and perhaps the only bust that UNESCO has in its Paris headquarters is that of Gandhi. So Gandhi is everywhere, but his ideas are still, I think, hiding somewhere deep in the sky, and we need this young generation to think about it. So anyway, I will, endless things we can talk about it. I will today just focus on one aspect, and I'm conscious, deeply conscious that this particular 7 days webinar has been addressed by some of the most eminent scholars and philosophers and historians who have worked specifically on Gandhi. And I cannot say the same thing about myself. I have worked on peace, and in that, and when you work on peace, you can't miss Gandhi. No dialogue on peace, no discourses on conflict resolution can be fulfilled, can be attained, carried out, unless we have Mahatma Gandhi. And sometimes we go critical about Gandhi, but you can't do without Gandhi. So as a start point, as an opening point, I will go back to what Dr. Chauhan mentioned in passing, very interestingly, and it gave me an idea. The title of this UNESCO-sponsored volume is Long Walk of Peace Towards Conflict Prevention. Actually, it was a team effort, but at the end, this whole book was done by me. I mean, a lot of illustrious people were there, but they were not able to deal with such complex challenge. I'm not appreciating my own effort, but then somehow, I think there's a little Gandhi in all of us, and I felt that we have to do this. But mind you, the title was Long Walk of Peace. And the title that Dr. Chauhan mentioned was the Long Walk to Freedom. It's Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. Now, there is a difference. See, in fact, when this book was being titled and everything, as you know, in UN system, people discuss it at several quarters, at regional, across regions and things, across gender, blah, blah, blah. And the majority thought that the title should be Long Walk to Peace. But I stood my ground. I said, no way. It has to be Long Walk of Peace. So Mandela was justified in having Long Walk to Freedom because perhaps national freedom is a destination. You become free. Well, it's a different discourse that our freedom means what and whether political freedom is sufficient. But I said, look, I belong to Gandhi's land.
And Gandhi was very categoric, very clear that peace has no destination. Peace is just the way. There is nothing like a train junction, like Howrah Junction or Mumbai Junction, that the train will stop, not go there. And this is where I think peace becomes a different methodology with Gandhi. Peace, Gandhi looks peace in everyday life. Gandhi doesn't believe that peace can be attained. Peace is like reaching Swarga or some other destination. So this is one thing that I thought I can begin with. And why Gandhi thought that peace is not a destination, peace is a way of life. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. In fact, it is so sort of exciting to see so many of Gandhian ideas have been translated, they've been short-circuited to make beautiful one-liner. Even if Gandhi did not use those expressions, of course, he meant it. Like, be the change you want to see the world. Now, this is not exactly what Gandhi has said, but Gandhi is putting humans at the center of everything. So this expression got popularized through Obama and rest. And world has enough for everybody's need, not for everybody's need. So these one-liner, simple life and high thinking. So these, even if I say with my students, I tell them that, look, pick up just 5, if not 10 one-liners and try to follow even 1% of Gandhi, and you will be a happy man. And don't do it because you want to be, you want to sacrifice anything, but I think this is the most pragmatic thing to do. Pick up anything. So anyway, trying to bring it more precisely. So I will try to, in next few minutes or maybe half an hour or 20 minutes, whatever, I will try to argue that while we know and we hear a lot about Gandhi's non-violence, Gandhi's satyagraha, Gandhi's composite view of peace, Gandhi's peacefulness, truthfulness, perhaps not many of us have followed the evolving discourses, evolving trajectories of peace internationally, globally, and especially in the United Nations. I mean, the way we define peace has come under a lot of interpretation, a lot of deconstruction, a lot of interrogation. And I think these, if you try to posit Gandhi within these changing, evolving parameters of how we define, how we look at peace, what is conflict, etc., then it's very instructive for any student, not simply peace studies, but anybody to understand our own realities. I always argue, don't try to understand Gandhi, because Gandhi was like what the Greeks would say, that every day new sun, all is in flux. Gandhi was very categoric, that he was very open to change his visions and ideas. He was not one of those, I mean, in a sense that Americans would call it bad, flip-flop, etc. No. Gandhi said, show me an alternative vision and I will change my view. So this was another methodology. So peace, in peace studies, historians, international relationists, for a long time they kept on arguing that peace is the absence of violence. Now, if you look at Gandhi's vision, this falls flat. For one reason, that Gandhi never believed in this binary. For him, peace and conflict, peace and unpeacefulness was a continuum. It's a part of the same process. And very interestingly, I often ask my students this question that why can't we say that war is the absence of peace? We only say peace is the absence of war. And then we try to understand the subtle and inevitable connection between what Foucauldians will call power and knowledge, or even the old-timers would call the Kuhn's paradigm, that the way this language is framed, and this language and peace as a discourse, peace as a term, has been a very empowering phenomenon. And probably, I don't know, historians will correct me, of course, but excepting Benito Mussolini, I never heard anybody saying that he doesn't like peace. People wage war for peace. Terrorists do their terrorism for peace. The great wars are fought for peace. Nobody dislikes peace. Is a one-word panacea, one-word which nobody wants to disown. Benito Mussolini said, I don't like peace, it's like dirty water. And many others, probably with good reasons. Perhaps there's a justice thing, and we'll come to that a little bit sometime, maybe in literature discourse. So peace is being used by the power that be to tell us something very simple. And that simple thing was war is inevitable. Conflict is a part of human nature. Violence is one of the natural instincts humans have. We were so much because on this stands the present structure of militarism throughout the world. Distrust, feeling, whether you call it Hobbesian state of affairs, you call it Machiavellian state of affairs, and of course there are Indian thinkers, everybody knows, and I don't want to get into that particular polemics here, but people say that we have to be insecure. We need to realize that war and conflict is the natural phenomena, and peace is an exception. Nobody believes that peace is the constant. Peace could be a constant. Peace could be a part of human nature, and war is an aberration. So in this case, peace is shown as an aberration, and war, violence, conflict as a natural, normal thing. So what is normal has been drifted, changed, and skewed to give meanings to a whole lot of things like security. In security domain also, it's always inevitable about state security. Nobody has any qualms about it. Of course, in today's world, borders are important. And so is the state security. And human security, the poor human security, which is disregarded and thrown out, and a lot of bashing up goes on in the realm of international relations. And I'm better trained international relationist and security scholar, and I know it. What is this human security? And so there is a tendency to once again capture security only by the state security consideration. And as a consequence, we have these particular state-centric notions. So Gandhi stood against the state-centric notion. As you know very well, that Gandhi has an inbuilt, I won't say aversion, but he was very nonchalant about the state apparatus as such. I mean, it can be argued that his vision was a state is not the vision of state we have today. I will not argue out, but then he was very suspicious of state's capacity to bring about peacefulness in the society. Similarly, he used a very wide canvas to describe what the trajectories of peace, Ahimsa, Satyagraha, Swadeshi, Swaraj, Sarvodaya, and I think we have heard and we know already a lot about it. The point I will bring you in between is that through this is that what Gandhi's vision of holistic peace was is quite close to what we today accept as sustainable development goals, but to be more precise, the definition of sustaining peace, not sustainable peace. Sustaining peace is the UN Secretary General has articulated a couple of years ago. And the sustaining peace is not simply about the absence of war. Here, I think if many of us, I'm sure it's a very enlightened college and students, we all know about SDGs, that everything relates, poverty, environment, peacefulness, women question, everything gets together, and this togetherness of all these concerns makes the concept of peacefulness. So I think this is a draw on Gandhi, and through my little association with UNESCO's work and also UN General Assembly and other occasions of joining them and participating, that every time there is a discussion on this holistic notion of peace, Gandhi gets in. Perhaps less in our lexicon, our discourse, but more in international parlance, because Gandhi completes it beautifully. He's a great finisher in showing us the connection. The other thing that we need to realize, and especially it's very relevant in today's context, is the Gandhi's unflinching belief that peace can never be brought through unpeaceful means. Peace by peaceful means. You can get some temporary solutions, some redress. But then if you are looking for a long-term peace, if you're really looking for a sustainable peace, then you have to adopt peaceful method. And this is something which once again drives peace studies to a great extent. In fact, one of the primers of peace studies, scripted by Johan Galtung, titles as Peace by Peaceful Means, and we'll talk about Gandhi. So peaceful, what was it? You see, Gandhi would not accept violence at any cost. I mean, you know, there are grand debates, and I'm aware a little bit about it. People have doubted his statements, his doing, his being in, you know, during his time in South Africa, he's joining the military in some voluntary capacity, etc., etc. And also, Gandhi never took ahimsa as some kind of cowardice. And then there are questions, all kind, you know, on and off. If you are a peace studies person, you are seen as a Gandhian, and inevitably comes a question that what Gandhi would have done in 9/11, what Gandhi would have done in this Bombay shootout, etc., etc. I think these are imagination. People don't want to understand that Gandhi did not have a 100% solution to all the problems of the world. So, but one thing which Gandhi was very upfront, and I would like especially the students to take note of it and research on it. Somehow all of us have presumed that ahimsa and non-violence is not a pragmatic thing. It does not work out. It does not work out in many situations. And look what Gandhi had to say, and I'm just quoting him. He said, "We are constantly being astonished at the amazing discoveries in the field of violence." That's what Gandhi is saying. We are constantly being astonished at the amazing discoveries in the field of violence. But I maintain that far more undreamt of and seemingly impossible discoveries will be made in the field of non-violence. The sense is that we have not really explored the possibilities of using non-violence as a methodology to solve our problem. We have invested almost entire human resources, the material resources, in discovering the military hardwares, the missiles, the MiGs and the Rafales and the Mirage and the so on and so forth. And it can't be otherwise. I mean, those of us who are good students, and we are all good students, so let me say that nobody is good or bad, it's an understanding. We know that most of the scientific discoveries were, for a long time, they were unfolded through the military resources, through the defense, the investigation of defense technology. So we have spent a lot of resources on that. Even today also, there is this peace index, global peace index. Just last week, it came out with its 2020 in calculus, and one has to realize that the whole this planet's almost decisive, perhaps more than half of the resources go into the making of weaponry, go into the making of defenses, go into the making of militaries. But that's a different debate, and we need to go back to Gandhi. So Gandhi believed in peaceful means, peace by peaceful means. Gandhi believed in celebrating conflict. This is very important for us to understand. In the sense that one of the debates that we have in peace and conflict is that once you believe that peace and conflict is a continuum, we accept conflict as natural. We look at conflict as reflecting incompatibilities, whether it is interpersonal, intergroup, interstate, or in international situation, incompatibilities, differences, mismatch. And Gandhi would always say, and those who have read Gandhi, and I'm sure they can give many sentences and quotations on that. He would say, I love conflict, because conflict creates a relationship which was otherwise not known to us. And in conflict research also, I believe that conflict parties have a relationship with one another. And Gandhi says that once you discover this relationship with your opponent, then at least the wall of anonymity goes down. And that's where he said that I celebrate conflict. In fact, one of the Nobel Peace Prize winner, David Hume, he was instrumental in negotiating the Northern Ireland peace process. He wrote a beautiful article titled that "What's Wrong with the Conflict?" Celebrating conflict. So conflict is a part of a living society. Conflict is a part of a healthy family also. So if you have quarrels and conflicts in your own household, that's a sign of a healthy mind, because otherwise you have this piece of graveyard, and nobody wants to have this piece of graveyard. And so you have to learn to be a little playful as far as your conflict handling attitude is concerned. So, but conflict is okay. They go out of hand, and we should ensure that they don't go out of hand, whether it is in your community relations, in your family, in your across the states or internationally. But violence is a problem, because violence is something that hurts people in a manner that is irreparable. And that's where Gandhi said that violence is something that he will never come to terms with. But by the way, one of the fundamental contributions which Gandhi had, he was much ahead of his time. And in fact, and this is what I'll just very quickly tell you, that Gandhi believed in both opposing direct as well as indirect violence. And to him, indirect violence was something like what later on was described as structural violence. You know, this notion of structural violence is commonly used today. Across social sciences, people use it. And in the normal course, it is attributed to the, a great social scientist. I think he must be approaching his 100 now. I have occasions of working with him a couple of times, Johann Galtung. He was a great disciple. He stopped calling himself disciple once he became too great, I must say that. But Johann Galtung gave this idea of structural violence. And on 2-3 occasions, I was with him, and he will give me special credence because I came from Varanasi. And he would say that in Varanasi, on the river bank of Ganga, there was this Institute of Gandhian Studies, which is now, of course, in a poor health. So Institute of Gandhian Studies, for 50 years ago, Johann Galtung goes there, reads Gandhi, and he picks up one sentence of Gandhi: hate the sin, not the sinner. Hate the sin, not the sinner. And then he goes deep into the understanding of this notion, and he has recorded it that was the start of his conceptualization of structural violence. Now, Gandhi too talked about this structural violence, whether it is in the form of untouchability, racism, communalism, gender-based discrimination. It always saw violence in a very wide canvas. I mean, I remember there's a big joke. I once quoted Gandhi saying that the students who do come late to the class, they are engaging in some kind of violence. And somebody quoted Gandhi saying that, he said, if teachers don't go to teach, that is also a kind of violence. So, Gandhi did not simply use the term violence in terms of bloodshed in killing. In fact, there are wonderful exposition. Arjuna Padurai, for instance, has talked very methodically about this. Gandhi's take on this position, that how human life is for him, Gandhi takes it differently, and he doesn't accord as the highest and ultimate value. But for Gandhi, the structural violence was important. Later years, Johann Galtung gave another supplementary concept known as cultural violence, in which he talked about legitimizing indirect violence, and he referred to the ideologies, understanding, the mindset, if you want, जो हम लोगों की सोच है, the way we look at things, that perpetuates cultural violence. When we don't see violence in child labor, when we don't see violence in your neighbor beating his spouse, when you don't see violence in people dying out of hunger, and this issues it. we legitimize things. And it's very unfortunate. If people die outside your country, don't worry as much. This is what the kind of borders have done, and we'll come to that a little bit. So this notion of indirect violence has been very seminal, very foundational to peace research, to peace studies. And people range of not simply Johan Galtung, but Gandhi's contribution. Gandhi opened this whole discourse, and by not simply worrying about the human life as such, by opening it to consciousness, opening it to other things. So this is an interesting area, and which then gets related to another aspect about which I know a lot of historians have also done good work on. That's everyday violence. For example, Gyanen Pandey has written on routine violence. Look, so many people have done it. That it's the routine violence ingrained in the very structure of society that is something to be worried about. That is something to be legitimized, conceptualized as violence. Then, of course, related to this is the double standards on violence, the violence of modernity, as some people call it. That, and I can, of course, drawing from a historian, Gyanendra Pandey, when he said that there is violence written in the making and continuation of contemporary political arrangements, and to the production and reproduction of majorities and minorities, which is called routine violence. The education of marginalized and subordinate groups and assemblages are themselves shot through with violence. Now, this is a deeper statement, and I'm not casting any judgment on it, but then the scholars and the historians have looked into this routine violence and everyday violence. And an argument is probably very aptly made that we tend to worry more about violence that doesn't involve big powers, big states, like we know that, we know even the names engraved on in many cities of United States of the American soldiers, 65,000 American soldiers who lost their lives in Vietnam. But we have no record, no cognizance, no reckoning of how many million Vietnamese lost their lives. We worry more about Kampuchea, Rwanda, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, but not the loss of lives in Iraq and the rest of the places. So these are people who are less represented. And now, as we conclude, as we go towards the last, there is no summing up on Gandhi. That's the whole problem about it. He's so interesting, and perhaps he's experiential. And it's very interesting. I keep on asking my students who work on Gandhi, how many books he has written, and they will rattle out just 2 books, Mahatma Gandhi, Swaraj and my Experiments with Truth. But he would learn every day, he would write letters every day, he will engage with people every day. And he was a great learner, and of course he had his feet rooted to his own soil. That's a different thing. But he was, so the one aspect is that of environmentalism. Arne Nies, especially, there was a request that we need to talk a little bit about it. And that Gandhi and his Arne Nies, who's attributed this notion of deep ecology, draws hugely on Gandhi's pro-nature and spiritual quest for self. Now, and Gandhi in many respects became the precursor of varied ecological philosophy that have emerged in recent years. See, the clue is here. For Gandhi, I know there was I along with many other much learned people, we sat together. What is Gandhi's concept of peace? He said, peace is achieved when human potentials could be realized without harming others in the community as well as in the larger ecosystem. And this larger ecosystem, incidentally, also include our planetary system. So there, for him, and I think this is a part of what sometimes we call it the India's traditional way of looking peace in a more holistic fashion. Incidentally, in none of the writings, excepting a couple of, because India is you have all kind of things, contrary views coming together, and so rich are our traditional ethics and narratives. But by and large, peace is never described as the absence of war. Peace is described in terms of inner harmony. Peace is described as your harmony with the nature. So in that sense, Gandhi sort of comes up with a planetary definition of peace in which everybody who joins this planet is a part of it. Now, but then there's another aspect before we almost close this time. I can see I've exceeded almost 40 minutes. I'm going to be that is there interesting suggestions. I'm sure some of you follow it. This Oxford University Press had published one of the very interesting book. There are dozens of extraordinary books. Who am I to recommend anything? But Mark Jürgen Mayer, he engaged in a Gandhian dialogue with several other of his contemporary, and comes out with certain notions to demonstrate that how conflicting parties can find mutually satisfying resolution by redirecting the focus of fight from persons to principles, to determine the truth of one's position in an argument, and cope with a recalcitrant opponent, use the power of non-cooperation and know when conflict is truly resolved. In fact, this primer becomes very remarkably relevant, and he engages in a fictional dialogue with Gandhi is having a dialogue with Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud and Reinhold Niebuhr over the generic causes of violence, anger, and love. So see the point about Gandhi, and the reason Gandhi should be read again and again and again is that he offers a methodology of discovering the truth yourself. I picked up one of his classic statement, which he, while he was speaking to the students, one of the convocations, and he said that the students asked him that, tell us one sentence. And he said, discover the simplest of truth yourself. So experiential was Gandhi. Don't believe in any ideology. Don't believe in any saint, sage, and Mahatma. Believe in your own experience. Go out and see if the sun really rises from the east. So that was the scientific temper of mind that Gandhi had. I mean, he was ahead of his time in so many ways. And some people have made a great advancement. Gene Sharp, for example, he has produced several conceptual and practical strategies to show that how Gandhi remains relevant today, how his non-violent tactics can still, non-violent action as he calls it, is possible and capable of wielding great power even against ruthless rulers and military regimes, because it attacks the most vulnerable characteristic of hierarchical institutions and governments. Now, even if you want, we can't do without Ashish Nandi. So Ashish Nandi also says that Satyagraha has the power to shame the powerful because it makes moral statement before the society. But it is also effective when the practitioner acquires the moral right to undertake the action. So, you know, there are voices, there are intellectual streams, there are theorizations, there are practical experiences which can be used and which must be used if we have to keep Gandhi alive and kicking in our society. And I'm sure this is something, a task that all of us feel. All these seminars, webinars, and dialogue and conversation, read Gandhi seriously. And when you do that, for God's sake, don't just go by this classic statement that Gandhi only said that show your other cheek kind of thing. No, Gandhi was far more profound. Gandhi was far more experiential. And for example, Gandhi knew something which UNESCO got to know the same later and quoted him on this, that since the wars begins in the minds of men, it is the minds of men that defenses of peace should be built. And he was very upfront in arguing that the young children should be taught peace education was a inevitable part of Nayi Taaleem. And the connection between the head and the heart is very important to him, to really make people sensitive and aware of the pacifist stream and how peace is more pragmatic. So there is a lot that can be said. As I promised, this notion of sustaining peace, which the Secretary General has come out with past 3-4 years, which connects all the sustainable goals together. If you make a translation of it in Gandhian language, you will find that Gandhi had said many of these things so much earlier. Gandhi never believed that peace becomes essential, like the peace building earlier used to be a post-conflict situation, that when the conflict breaks out, you have this peacekeeping, then the negotiation takes place. No, first of all, Gandhi never believed that the unpeacefulness is primarily because of the conflict between territorial states. He believed that unpeacefulness is primarily because of imperfections in our human hearts and minds, and that is something that need to be dealt with. So, in that sense, I think the agenda for sustainable development and especially the an inclusive vision of peacefulness, which talks about peaceful societies must be just societies, and they would be inclusive societies. And you can see that Gandhi's notions are coming alive. So today's discourses on peace studies, by the way, is not simply about philosophy, it's a practical science. And one of the things that we emphasize, and I want you to consider that, is that peace is not an ideology, it's not an idealism, it's not a euphoria. Peace is the most pragmatic need of our time. And this need has to be fulfilled. While doing so, we also need to understand that peace is never apolitical. It is always politically charged, because sometimes, the victors will say that we have got peace here, but look for the elements of justice, look for the elements of human rights, and then. So these are all disparate thoughts, and as I said in passing, that the learning about Gandhi, learning about peace, connecting them is not simply important as a student, as a scholar, as a researcher, but as a human being. If you want to live this 21st century with peacefulness, and I think all of us should plan that, then we need to realize that peace is underfunded these days. Nobody cares. The peace centers are languishing. Fortunately, we are in a good university, Central University. We have this UNESCO chair that gives us a little protection and thing. But and as compared to, say, security studies, peace studies there are not many takers. And that we are seeing. So no qualms about that. National security is important, but we always say that human security is a very important complement to national security. So we live in a world that is overarmed. Peace is underfunded. And efforts are being made everywhere. You see, how many of us really are cognizant of the fact that there is a right to peace now, which is waiting to be implemented. It's passed by the UN General Assembly. Right to peace, fundamental human right. Finally, after 30 years of struggle. How many of us really have paid attention in our social media and the newspapers, which are a strange story, that there is a successful passage of a resolution which declared nuclear weapons as illegal. This was steered by an international NGO, which is Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons. So we, all of us, young people, not so young, all human beings, must consider peace and must put their lot in favor of peace in this very strange world wherein enemy, alien, insecurity, anxieties, the big planes, they divert our attention. The fearfulness takes away the pragmatic salience of peace. So much to say, so much to talk, so much to learn. But thank you so much once again for allowing me to express my emotions, a bit of my understanding of peace studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now the floor will be open for questions. Sir will be taking up some questions. Those who will be asking questions are requested to please say their name and department and college institution before asking questions, and they need to be direct and okay. So for the first, sir, shall we begin?
Yeah.
Priyanka, sir. Okay. So first,
yeah, sure.
First question, we have Jyotirmoy Jishnu.
Yes. Hello.
Jishnu, are you here?
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Good afternoon, sir. Yeah. So initially, thank you for giving us this time. And my question is regarding the statement that you said that hate the sin, not the sinner. Like I have a real problem with this statement, and with the general idea of Gandhi regarding this, because it's true in a moral and academic arena for study and all, but this one statement. And by taking the essence of that statement, that hate the sin not the sinner, maybe the justice system that in India or all around world has got delayed and has become very much inadequate, because until and unless we punish a person for committing a sin like a heinous crime like rape and murder, there the mentality of people to commit those crimes would not be carved down. So I guess the relevance of that statement, because this is a very, very popular statement. We have been listening this from our very childhood. So I guess the relevance of that statement in the present scenario is little questionable. Like, sorry if I'm wrong, but correct me. Thank you, sir.
No, no, you're not wrong. You just opened the debate. You see, there are no easy, there is no binary. You see, when Gandhi was saying, he was saying that, look, try to think why this man has taken arms. Was he born like that? I will relate a very real incident. Very young I was, and I was invited to speak in, I can share it with you, in Ujjain, it's a Vikram University, 30 years, 30 years. And that was on this Gandhi Day, 2nd of October. And I was the main speaker, very excited, but then they were waiting for the district magistrate to come, and they endlessly kept on waiting, and the chief, and I said, look, my train will go. Anyway, this is a little humor, as somebody said, that Gandhi talked about humor. So this fellow, when he came in, he started saying that what human rights, what Gandhi talks about, there is a prisoner, there is a criminal by the name of Bambar, throws bombs. And what kind of human rights you want? Actually, it was on Human Rights Day that this thing was happening. And so do you expect any human rights for him? And then he also used a bad word for the African Americans because he didn't know the language. And then I got up and there was a clap, young people. How could you give human rights to a criminal who calls himself Bambar? And I said something, if you really find out, Mr. District Magistrate, who gave this name? Do you think his mother would have given this name Bambar to him? Or else the circumstances, the society, the lack of education, the erroneous ideology. I mean, I still maintain that I'm not one of those who is against the Indian criminal or any criminal system, because society cannot survive. I'm all for the punishment. But while we do so, we also need to find out the generic causes which leads people to take to these heinous crimes. My young friend, take a 20 years of record and see that the worst of punishment given to the rapists, the criminals, the murderers, has it stopped the events anytime? Just see what happened in Delhi, and so much of upheaval and punishment, etc. So I'm all for punishment. I don't say. And this is, there's a binary. It's not simply that you accept something, you reject another. But for God's sake, look for circumstances that make people so criminal. There are still societies. I have spent a lot of time in Nordic countries. The education, the civil society, the way people deal with each other. I'm not saying that they are crimeless, but it's substantially low. So that's what, when Gandhi says that the problem lies with the structure, with our education, with our upbringing, with our, the way we deal, the family is ordered. That is the way to diminish it. So never see it as a binary, that it's argued that the sinner should go free. But an argument that we have to go into the generic causes of all these things. That's what my sense is.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Hello,
For
sir.
next question, we have Dr. Pranidhar.
Yes, please.
Hello, sir. Thank you for your nice presentation. So I have two questions Can I read one by one
Just
or
to go one
one
by
after other?
one. My mind is a little
Please.
cluttered these days. So one question, just to select one question, or
Okay,
make
okay.
one out of two.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. So actually, Gandhi, as I observed, that mainly talked about internal peace of individual, internal peace of mind. Then only outer peace is possible in any respect. But the irony is that of the present day materialistic worldview, that it provokes us to be restless without having any peace of mind. So in this regard, don't you think that government policy should be strict enough and focused on a check to the accumulation of material affluence by the rich people, sir? What is your opinion on that? Thank you, sir.
See, I would still say, just pick up one single book of Gandhi, Swaraj, Hind Swaraj. See, you will find it quite out of tune with the world. It's a critique of Western civilization. It's a critique of a model that eventually had to become, or is today, the universal, in many respects, a universal model for development and handling our civil society. See how he has raised these questions. I'll tell you that for Gandhi, peace was not simply Om Shanti or inner peace. Gandhi worked actively when it came to communal issues, when it came to violence against untouchables, when it came to Hindu-Muslim disaffection, or he had his own visions about nuclear weapons, he had his visions about Zionism, Palestinian problem. So let's not conflate Gandhi with simply a saint who talks about Om Shanti Om. No, definitely he was not. Gandhi was perhaps one of those rare philosopher. I don't think that he himself saw himself as a philosopher, but he was one of those rare persons who had a world view, world vision, where things relate to each other. And I think in that sense, your very question is well placed, well posited. But the fact is that for Gandhi, inner peace and social peace, they were not mutually exclusive. It was important to create right kind of social situation. That's where he talked about this
Okay,
structural violence issues, that you create a, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We will be taking one question per participant. So we will be moving to the next candidate, that is Khushi Kesari. Khushi, are you here?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I believe she is not, due to some connectivity issue, she is not connecting with us. So I'll read out her question. So her question is, it is said that we opted for the path of non-violence because we did not really have any means of violence. If we, however, had means of violence on mass level, do you think Gandhi's outlook on violence and non-violence would be different?
I don't think this is a, some people do argue that technically what Gandhi did was perhaps appropriate because we did not have that kind of wherewithal to oppose Britishers through forcible means. But I think this is a misconception, this is erroneous, and this is not based on proper understanding of Gandhi. For Gandhi, non-violence was not an act of cowardice, as I say. It was perhaps an act, and he would say it in so many words. It was the most brave act. It was not discretion alone. It was an act of great courage. And he said it and he proved it. And if you look at the world situation, tell me which country has taught lessons to which country. The Americans, despite such, my God, so great preponderance and superiority over Vietnam, couldn't win it. When all the countries are nuclearly armed and they have nukes, can we really defeat others? And so today's options are also the options which Gandhi had. At that time, he believed, and in a very outset, I said that for Gandhi, trust and belief in human nature was very intrinsic. And that's where we should begin to understand Gandhi. For Gandhi, everybody had these elements of piety, goodness, and karuna, compassion as we call it. And this needs to be evoked. And that way, I think he stands very different from other thinkers of his time.
Sir, I hope Khushi, your question has been answered. We will move to next question. Before that, sir, I would like to ask how many more questions would you like to entertain? Should
You
we
know,
go for 2-3 more?
yeah, of course. It's so wonderful to be with the students, and because they speak with such
Actually, everyone is so eager to meet. Was so eager to meet you. They have so many questions. So we will go for 2-3 more. If that's okay with you.
pictures.
Okay.
Carry on.
So,
Carry
so for next question, we have Ishita Roy. Ishita, are you here? Okay, so I'll read her question. How peaceful or non-violent do you think it is for someone like Gandhi, who comes from a privileged background and does not understand the circumstances of untouchables, to fast unto death and indirectly mentally pressurize Ambedkar so that separate electorate for untouchables could be revoked?
I don't think that even in their times, Gandhi or Ambedkar would have an answer to that. You know, first of all, people change. People make mistakes also, whether it is Gandhi or Ambedkar or I and you. And the error of judgments rather than mistakes, I would put it this way. And as far as Gandhi is concerned, don't read him. Some of my friends were saying, oh, it's very boring to read Gandhi. Fine. See one of his Western films, David Attenborough's Mahatma Gandhi. I think that has a greater viewership than the readers of Gandhi is. Gandhi changed, yes. Unlike many others, past and present, he did not come from a very poor family. He was born to a rich family and well-trained barrister he was. And 21 years he remained an NRI, by the way, and then goes to South Africa. But once he returns, there is a very, as you know, that sometimes these fictional things make better sense than the truth. There is a classic scene that Gandhi is traveling in a train, and the train stops somewhere in a forest area or near the village, and he sees a very poor woman, without, probably Dalit or not, I can't speculate. And there he sees that she doesn't have clothes after her bath to put on, and he throws her jacket. So it happened or not happened, or maybe there is a story behind it. But Champaran, for instance, Champaran I know because I have worked there and I have talked to the activist. In Champaran he goes, and he's very fond of Swachhata, as you know. That was also one of his principles. And one of his carer, he would come with his wife with the same cloth, and by the evening their cloth is stinking, and he tells his wife, Ba, why don't you go and tell them to wash their clothes every day and wear the next. Ba goes there and comes back very emotionally disturbed. He said, they just have one set of clothes. And that was, and Gandhi admits, and that reveals. My point is that who was a greater carer? I personally rate Ambedkar as one of the highest honor, and his intellect, his commitment is absolutely second to nobody. But different people have different trajectories of learning about life, about which, give them sobering experiences. But it's not that Gandhi was uncaring. He was very caring. His style, his trajectory, his understanding might be conditioned by his own circumstances. And I think without nitpicking what has happened, I mean, who cares about what these people had said? Did we really care about what Ambedkar said or Gandhi said? We try to follow them though. So I think let's not be very polemical and very sort of critical about these aspects.
Okay, sir. For next question, we have Surji Dwivedi.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. So my name is Surji Dwivedi, and sir, मेरे दो questions हैं actually. Okay, सर, जो पहला क्वेश्चन है कि गांधी को महात्मा कहना कितना रेलेवेंट है, क्योंकि ऑब्वियसली वो बहुत अच्छे लीडर थे, बट उनमें बहुत सारे फ्लॉज भी थे.
तो उनको महात्मा कहना मतलब एक अलग ही लेवल पे उनको कर देता है कि कोई कमी नहीं हो सकती है। एंड दूसरा क्वेश्चन ये था कि जो आइडिया है नॉन वायलेंस का या पीस का, वो न्यू आइडिया नहीं था, मतलब वो बहुत सारे लोगों का वो आइडिया था, लेकिन गांधी को मतलब गांधी कैसे कौन सी आइडिया मतलब क्या उन्होंने टेक्निक्स अपनाई जो उनको सबसे अलग करता है या उनके आइडिया को ज़्यादा वो मानता है, रेलेवेंट मानता है?
Sir, are you here?
I think there is some issue with Professor Upadhyay's network. Sir, are you getting our voice? Yeah, I'm calling him on his number. Just give me a second.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir.
आवाज आ रही है आपको?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes, sir.
Audible, sir.
हाँ, वो हमें लगता है कि कुछ इंटरनेट का यहाँ सिलसिला हो गया था। तो हाँ, इनका सवाल जो था हमारे जो इसके पहले था, क्या नाम, शुभ नाम था आपका? हाँ, तो देखिए एक चीज़ तो हम बताएं कि और ये एक बुजुर्ग की तरह से हम आपसे कह रहे हैं कि अच्छे सवालों को अच्छे जवाबों से बेहतर होता है अच्छे सवाल हम करें। You know, the good question is better than many good answers given. अब देखिए महात्मा गांधी ने अपना नाम तो महात्मा खुद रख लिया था। महात्मा गांधी को लोगों ने महात्मा कहा, कुछ लोगों ने उनको और कुछ खराब भी चीजें कही। आप जो सोचते हैं, महात्मा गांधी किसी से कहने नहीं गए थे कि हमको महात्मा कहिए। और महात्मा गांधी ने तो अगर आप उनकी पुस्तक पढ़ें, आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
Yes, sir.
मेरी आवाज जी, आप अगर उनकी किताब ईमानदारी से पढ़ें, और हम आपको इनाम भी देंगे, हमारा पता बहुत मुश्किल नहीं है, अगर कि माय एक्सपेरिमेंट्स विद ट्रूथ, उसमें बहुत सी कमियों को बताते हैं और कहते हैं कि जीवन भर हम कमियों को अपने पाते हैं, और हम सभी को, चाहे आप हो चाहे हम हैं, हमको अपनी कमियों को जानना चाहिए और उनको दूर करने का प्रयास करना चाहिए। तो गांधी एक बहुत नॉर्मल आदमी थे, हमको नहीं लगता है कि, और उन्होंने बार बार कहा कि मेरे बाद मैं नहीं चाहता हूं कि गांधीइज्म जैसी कोई चीज रहे। आप एक मेथोडोलॉजी, मैंने तो आपको खुद ही बताया, आपने बहुत अच्छा सवाल किया कि उन्होंने कहा कि भाई छोटे से छोटा सच भी आप खुद खोजिए। गांधी के जीवन में बहुत सी चीजों को लेके उनकी चीजें कही जाती हैं, और बहुत सी चीजें ऐसी हैं जिस पर हमको भी लगता है कि हाँ, हम खुद नहीं मानते हैं कि गांधी कोई परफेक्ट नहीं हो सकता है। अगर परफेक्ट हो जाएगा तो वो इंसान नहीं रहेगा। हमें तो लगता है महात्मा कह के हम लोगों ने उनको अपने जीवन से दूर कर दिया। करे तो महात्मा ही कर सकते हैं, हम नहीं कर सकते हैं, हम मुक्त हो गए, हम क्या कर सकते हैं, महात्मा को क्वेश्चन कर सकते हैं, करिए। तो बेटा ये हम एक सवाल आपसे कहेंगे कि बहुत सी जो शंकाएं होती हैं उसको खुद जानने की कोशिश करो कि उस व्यक्ति ने अपने बारे में क्या कहा। अगर गांधी वाङ्मय का कोई भी हिस्सा तुम पढ़ो, हम लोग देखिए एक दुर्भाग्य से एक ऐसे दौर में आ गए हैं कि हम ओरिजिनल कुछ नहीं पढ़ते, हम सिर्फ व्हाट्सएप संदेश पढ़ते हैं या हम डिजिटल लाइब्रेरी से कुछ उठा लेते हैं, और उसकी वजह से ये होता है कि हम कमेंट्रीज पढ़ के काम चला लेते हैं। तो इस चीज पर, इसको आप अन्यथा न लीजिए, मगर इसको आप अगर अपने जीवन में अवतरित करिए तो आपको बहुत लाभ।
Okay. For next question, we have with us Dr. Shailendra from English department. Sir, are you here?
Yes, please go ahead.
Shailendra sir.
Dr. Shailendra, please.
Don't think we have Dr. Shailendra in our department. Must be Dr. Sanjay Verma. I've read his question in the chat box.
Okay, Dr. Sanjay Verma from English department.
Yes, I am here. Thank you very much. I think my voice is
My
audible.
apologies.
Yes, yes, Sanjay, please go ahead.
या सर, मैं जैसा कि अमित जी ने बताया, मैं इंग्लिश डिपार्टमेंट में हूँ किरोड़ीमल में। तो मेरा क्वेश्चन है, मैंने लिखा है, कई जगह मैंने ये जवाब पूछने की कोशिश की है तो कंट्रोवर्शियल ही, जैसा आपने अभी कहा पुराने प्रश्न के जवाब में, कि अब मैं सिर्फ आपका बड़ा इंफॉर्मेटिव और बहुत अच्छा था, आपने इंटरप्रिटेशन भी दिया गांधी जी के बहुत सारी चीजों पे जो उन्होंने नहीं भी कही, जैसा आपने कहा कि वी कैन इंटरप्रेट हिज टीचिंग्स एंड आइडियल्स आल्सो। लेकिन जो वायलेंस और नॉन वायलेंस के बारे में आपने कहा, उसमें जो मेरा प्रश्न है कि स्वामी श्रद्धानंद जी की जो का एसेसिनेशन हुआ, उसके बाद जो गांधी जी का रुख रहा, उन्होंने प्रस्ताव तो पेश किया उनके शोक के लिए, लेकिन फिर वो अब्दुल रशीद की फांसी के लिए भी चिट्ठी लिखते हैं। तो कहीं ना कहीं ये क्या लगता है कि वायलेंस या नॉन वायलेंस का एक्सेप्टेंस है कि एक तरफ जबकि कन्वर्जन करवा रहे थे और उसके खिलाफ उनका बेटा खुद मुस्लिम धर्म अपना लिया, और बहुत सारी ऐसी चीजें हैं जिसको कि हम जस्टिफाई करें या ना करें, हमारी अपनी सोच पे। मैं आपके विचार जानना चाहता हूँ इस पे सिर्फ। थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू।
पहली चीज तो हमने संजय शुरू में कहा कि गांधी वाङ्मय पर बहुत काम किया है, बहुत हिस्टोरियंस ने जीवन भर काम किया है, कुछ अभी भी कर रहे हैं लगातार। मैं सोचता हूँ देश विदेश में बहुत अच्छे किस्म के 100 से ऊपर निश्चित रूप से निष्णात विद्वान होंगे जिन्होंने गांधी जीवन और कृतित्व पे लगातार काम किया है। और मैं नहीं आ पाता हूँ अपने को उनकी श्रेणी में, जो आप चीज़ें बता रहे हैं मैं उनसे अवगत हूँ, मगर मैं एक दूसरे ढंग से इसका जवाब सोचता हूँ। और दूसरे ढंग का जवाब मैंने जो पार्टली पिछले सवाल के उसमें भी कहा कि देखिए, आप अपने जीवन में देखिए, आप अपने जीवन में चलिए, मत देखिए, हम अपने जीवन में देखें कि कई बार बहुत से मोड़ ऐसे आते हैं कि जब हम जो हमारा एक्शन होता है वो हमारी वैचारिकी से दूर होता है, क्योंकि हम जिन चीज़ों को वरीयता देते हैं, जिन चीज़ों को हम प्रायोरिटाइज करते हैं, वो शायद वो प्रायोरिटाइजेशन एक दूसरे ढंग से करते हैं, तो हमारी सोच डिफरेंट होती है। और हाँ, अलबत्ता मैं इस चीज़ को मानता हूँ कि, और मैं इसको दृढ़ता से कहता हूँ कि हम लोगों को अपने देश में एक ऐसी वृत्ति को लाना चाहिए कि हम हर जो भी हमारे सेलिब्रिटीज रहे, राजनेता रहे, पूर्व के और आज के भी, उनके बारे में हम खुल के बात कर सकें। अगर हम ये मान के चलते हैं कि नहीं, महात्मा गांधी कैन डू नो रॉन्ग, तो गांधी ने स्वयं कई बार अपनी आत्मकथा में, और शायद जिंदा होते 10 साल और मिले होते उनको, तो वो 10 साल में हो सकता है कि ये इन चीज़ों पर खुद भी माफ़ी मांगते। और गांधी ने कितनी चीज़ों पर माफ़ी मांगी है उसको भी देखें आप, जहाँ उन्होंने प्रायश्चित किया है, दूसरों के लिए भी प्रायश्चित किया है, अपनी सोच के भी। तो ये चीज़ें हैं, हम कोई जस्टिफिकेशन नहीं होल्ड कर रहे हैं, मगर हम ये सिर्फ कह रहे हैं कि गांधी वॉज सिंपली ए ह्यूमन बीइंग हु कम से कम किसी राजनीतिक पद, और उसके लिए अब इस पर भी बहस हो सकती है कि उनकी साइको एनालिसिस क्या थी, हम करते रहें। हमें लगता है कि पेड़ में अगर अच्छे फल लगे हैं तो हमें उनकी ओर ध्यान देना चाहिए, बजाय इसके कि हम ये गिने कि कितने फल हैं, उनको कितनी चिड़ियाएं खा के चली गई हैं या कितनी सड़ गए हैं फल। तो ये कि हमारी सोच है, बड़ी बनाल सोच हो सकती है, हो सकता है कि इसको उत्तर के रूप में आप न ग्रहण करें। और इन चीज़ों पर लगातार बहस होती रही है, जो गांधी के इस तरह के एक इनकॉम्पिटेबल पोजीशंस रही हैं।
थैंक यू सर।
Thank you, sir. Due to time constraint, we will be ending the Q&A session. Thank you, all of you have sent their such thought-provoking questions. We will be providing you with sir's email link if you want to contact him. Sir will be very happy to help you. As we proceed to end this session, first of all, Priyanka sir, I would like to thank you for delivering such a fascinating and full of wisdom lecture. I would like to invite Vandana ma'am to address us all. Vandana ma'am, over to you. Vandana ma'am, are you here?
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, I was on mute. On behalf of Department of History, with deep gratitude, I thank Professor Priyankar Upadhyay for delivering very insightful lecture and drawing our attention to Gandhi in contemporary peace continuum. Dr. Vibha Singh Chauhan has been inspiration behind this week-long webinar. We are very fortunate to have her constant encouragement and support. Dr. Anshu and IQAC team have given us wider platform to communicate. And I thank all the 73 participants who have taken out their precious time over this weekend and participated in this webinar. And finally, I thank Dr. Amit Suman and the student team who has worked behind the scene tirelessly to make this webinar successful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I would like to invite Pragya to take over.
Thank you, everyone. We would like to express our heartfelt and sincere thanks to Professor Priyankar Upadhyay for taking out time from his busy schedule and enlightening us with your thoughts. We feel so fortunate to have you with us today. Thank you for helping us understand Gandhi and his ideas in a broader perspective. I would also like to thank Principal Ma'am Dr. Vibha Singh Chauhan, Dr. Anshu Ma'am of IQSE, Dr. Amit K. Suman Sir, and all other senior faculty members, teachers of various departments of Kirodimal College and across various universities for making this session a great success. Moreover, I would also like to thank all the students of Kirodimal College and the students across different universities who attended the session and made it so interactive and interesting. In general, after such events, we present a memento to our esteemed guests by legacy, but due to this pandemic situation, we could not do so. This is the most we could do, and hence we would like to present you a virtual token of gratitude. Respected Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, thank you for delivering this gripping and thought-provoking lecture on 4th October 2020 as a part of international webinar on relevance of Mahatma Gandhi in the 21st century, philosophy, political ideas, and social and spiritual dimension, organized by the Department of History in collaboration with Internal Quality Assurance Cell, IQAC, Kirodimal College, University of Delhi. Your presentation was very well received by the students and imparted valuable insights. We all look forward to meeting you on campus in future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your time, and also thank you everyone for joining us. And I hope to see you all tomorrow at the same time with this. We are supposed to end this session. Thank you so much for attending this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone. With this, we end this session.
May I request Mr. Manish Kumar